The first thing the rancher noticed was the silence.
Not the quiet of peace,
but the kind that presses against the chest. The kind that follows a man who has waited too long for something he never believed would truly come. The wind rolled low across the prairie, bending dry grass like bowed heads at a graveside. And the old chapel stood alone beneath a wide American sky, its paint worn thin by years of sun and dust. Inside, a man named Calder Holt stood stiff as a fence post, his hands rough from work, his heart tighter than a knotted rope. He had sent for a bride he had never seen, trusting ink on paper more than hope. Now the moment had arrived, and every step outside sounded like a verdict. Calder was not a man built for ceremony. He was built for dawns that cracked open with frost, for cattle that needed watching through long nights, for land that answered only to grit and patience. The Holt Ranch had been in his family longer than anyone cared to remember, carved from stubborn earth by men who spoke little and endured much. Calder had inherited the land, the loneliness, and a promise to keep the place alive no matter the cost. What he had not inherited was warmth. His house echoed. His table stayed set for one. And so, with a reluctance he hid behind plain words, he had answered an advertisement that felt half foolish and half desperate. Please accept this virgin bride. The phrase had unsettled him when he wrote it, yet he mailed the letter all the same. The town whispered about it. Of course, they always did. Some said a mail-order bride was a last resort for men who had failed at ordinary life. Others said it was brave, even honorable, to offer a woman a steady home when the world had little mercy to spare. Calder listened to none of it. He trusted actions more than voices. Still, as he waited inside the chapel, his shoulders squared and jaw set, doubt crept in like cold through thin walls. What kind of woman would agree to marry a stranger on a remote ranch? What kind of man had he become to ask? Outside, the sky shifted, clouds drifting slow and heavy. A single wagon approached along the dirt road, wheels creaking, horse snorting steam into the air. The sound reached Calder before sight, and his pulse answered in his ears. He told himself this was practical, nothing more. To people joining lives for mutual survival. Yet something deeper stirred, something he had buried beneath years of routine. When the wagon stopped, the silence returned, thicker than before. The chapel door opened. She stepped inside without hesitation, as if she had walked that path many times in her mind. Her name, he would later learn, was Allowan Grace. It suited her in a way that felt almost unfair. She was not fragile, though there was a quiet softness to her presence. Her dress was plain, neatly pressed, hands folded at her waist. Her eyes held a calm that did not belong to a woman entering a stranger's life. They belonged to someone who knew exactly where she stood. Calder rose without realizing it. His boots scraped the wooden floor, loud as thunder to his ears. He expected nerves, awkwardness, maybe fear. What he did not expect was the way Elowan looked at him, not with curiosity, not with caution, but with recognition. For a heartbeat, neither of them spoke. The preacher cleared his throat, but his voice seemed distant, like sound traveling across a long field. Calder's attention stayed fixed on the woman before him. Allowan took one step closer, then another, closing the space that had once felt safe. He noticed the small details without meaning to. The steady rise of her breath, the faint scent of soap and clean cotton, the strength in her posture. She was young, yes, but not naive. There was something anchored in her, something that refused to be moved by uncertainty. When she reached him, she lifted her hand. Calder froze. Her fingers wrapped around his, warm and sure. Like she already knew the shape of his palm, like she had held it 100 times in some unseen place. The contact sent a jolt through him, sharper than any winter wind. He had shaken hands with ranch hands, with traders, with men who measured worth in cattle and coin. This was different. This was intimate in a way that unsettled him to the bone. Elowan did not smile. She did not blush or pull away. She simply held his hand and met his gaze, eyes steady, almost solemn. In that moment, Calder felt as if the ground beneath him had shifted, as if the land he knew so well had decided to test him in a new way. The preacher began to speak again, words about vows and duty drifting between them. Calder heard them, but did not absorb them. His thoughts raced. Who was this woman? Where had she come from? Why did her touch feel like a memory instead of a beginning? Iloan's grip tightened slightly, not in fear, but in reassurance. It was as if she sensed the storm inside him and chose to stand firm against it. Calder swallowed hard. He had expected to feel in control, to guide this arrangement like every other decision on his ranch. Instead, he felt exposed, seen in a way no one had managed before. Around them, the chapel creaked, old wood adjusting to the weight of time. Sunlight filtered through dusty windows, catching in Iloan's hair, turning it the color of late wheat. Calder noticed a small scar near her wrist, faint but deliberate, the mark of a past that did not ask permission to exist. This woman was not a blank page. She was a story already written, and he had only just turned the cover. The vows ended too quickly. The words "yes" and "I do" passed Calder's lips like borrowed language. When it was done, when the preacher stepped back and declared them joined, a murmur of approval floated in from the few witnesses gathered behind. Calder barely registered it. His focus remained on the woman beside him, now his wife, by law and promise. Outside, the prairie waited. The ride to the ranch was quiet. The wagon rolled forward, wheels tracing the same path Calder had traveled his whole life. Iloan sat beside him, close enough that their shoulders brushed with each turn. She looked out at the land with interest, not awe, as if she were taking stock of something she intended to keep. Calder stole glances at her when he thought she would not notice. Each time, he found her expression thoughtful, composed. He wanted to ask questions. Where had she grown up? What had driven her to answer his letter? Did she fear the isolation, the hard work, the endless horizon? Yet every time he opened his mouth, the words tangled. Something told him to wait. Something told him she would speak when ready. As the ranch came into view, Iloan finally turned to him. Her eyes softened just a little. "This place," she said quietly. "It feels familiar." Calder frowned. "You have never been here." She nodded. "No." The wagon slowed, stopping in front of the house that had known more silence than laughter. Calder jumped down and offered his hand, expecting formality. Iloan took it again, the same steady grip, sending that same unexplainable certainty through him. She stepped down, skirts brushing the dust, and looked at the house with a calm resolve that unsettled him more than fear ever could. Inside, the rooms waited, empty but expectant. Calder watched Iloan cross the threshold, carrying a single suitcase that looked too light for the life ahead. She paused just inside, her fingers brushing the doorframe as if greeting an old friend. "Calder Holt," she said, speaking his name for the first time. It sounded different when she said it, anchored, certain. "I know this may sound strange." He braced himself. "But I believe I was meant to find you." His chest tightened. "You do not even know me." Iloan met his gaze, her expression unreadable, touched with something like sorrow and hope intertwined. "That is where you are wrong." Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the windows. Calder felt the weight of the land press closer as if listening. He had wanted a practical solution to loneliness. Instead, he had invited a mystery into his home. A woman whose touch felt like fate and whose words opened doors he did not know existed. As night fell over the prairie, Calder lay awake staring at the ceiling, Iloan's presence just down the hall like a quiet promise and a looming question. Who was the woman he had married? What truth had followed her all the way to his door, waiting for the right moment to be revealed? Sleep did not come easy to Calder Holt that night. The house creaked the way it always had, but every sound felt sharper, closer, as if the walls themselves were listening. He lay on his back, hands folded over his chest, staring into the dark while the past pressed in from all sides. He had known loneliness for years, yet this was different. There was another presence under his roof now, quiet but undeniable. A woman whose voice still lingered in his ears. A woman who claimed familiarity where none should exist. Down the hall, Iloan Grace sat awake as well. She had not unpacked her suitcase. It rested by the bed closed, like something she might need to grab at a moment's notice. The room smelled of old pine and clean sheets, a mix of history and something new. She listened to the wind scrape along the house and let her thoughts wander back to the long road that had led her here. She had crossed more than miles to reach this ranch. She had crossed a line she could never step back over. Morning arrived slow and pale, stretching light across the land. Calder rose before dawn out of habit, pulling on his boots and coat with careful movements. For a moment he forgot he was not alone. Then he heard footsteps behind him. Lowen stood in the doorway, already dressed, her hair neatly tied back. She looked ready for work. Not like a guest, not like a stranger. That unsettled him more than if she had seemed lost. "You do not have to get up so early," he said, his voice rough from lack of sleep. She shook her head. "Want to learn the rhythm of this place." That word again. Learn. As if she had always intended to. They ate breakfast in near silence. The clink of cutlery sounded loud in the small kitchen. Calder watched her from the corner of his eye as she moved with quiet purpose, noticing how she took in every detail. The way the kettle sat slightly off-center on the stove, the small crack in the wall near the window, the framed land deed hanging crooked above the sideboard. "Keep this house the way it was," she said gently. "It was my father's," Calder replied. "And his before him." Lowen nodded, as if that answered something only she had asked. After breakfast, Calder stepped outside to tend the cattle, expecting Lowen to stay behind. Instead, she followed, pulling on borrowed gloves without asking. The morning air was sharp, carrying the smell of earth and hay. The cattle lowed in the distance, dark shapes moving against the rising sun. "This work is not easy," Calder said. "It is not fitting for everyone." She met his gaze, unflinching. "Neither is running from what calls you." He frowned. "You speak like someone who knows this land." "I know hardship," she replied. "Land teaches that wherever you are," they worked side by side, the silence between them filled with unspoken questions. Calder showed her the fences, the water troughs, the worn paths cut by generations of hooves. She listened carefully, asking thoughtful questions, never slowing him down. By midday, he realized she had not complained once. As the sun climbed higher, they returned to the house. The visitor waited by the gate. Gideon Pike leaned against the post, hat tipped low, eyes sharp with curiosity. He was the kind of man who knew everything before being told, or so he liked to believe. "So it is true," Gideon said, straightening as Calder approached. "You sent off for a bride and got one." Calder stiffened. "This is my wife." Lowen stepped forward before Calder could say more. "Lowen Grace," she said calmly. Gideon studied her, his gaze lingering a moment too long. "You came a long way for this life." "I came far enough," she replied. Gideon chuckled. "You will find folks around here ask questions. That is their right," Lowen said. "Answers are another matter." Gideon's smile faded. He tipped his hat and turned back toward town, though his eyes lingered on the house, as if committing it to memory. That night, Calder locked the doors without knowing why. Days passed, each one layering more questions over the last. Lowen settled into the ranch as if she had always belonged. She learned quickly, worked steadily, and carried herself with quiet strength. Yet there were moments when her gaze drifted beyond the horizon, her expression shadowed by something she did not voice. One evening, Calder found her standing near the old cottonwood at the edge of the property. The tree had been struck by lightning years ago, split, but still standing. "My father planted this," Calder said. Lowen touched the rough bark. "Some things survive being broken." He studied her face. "You speak from experience." She withdrew her hand. "Everyone does, whether they admit it or not." That night, Calder dreamed of footsteps in the dark, of voices he could not place. He woke with a start, heart pounding, the sense that something unseen had crossed his land. Lowen woke too. "I heard it," she whispered when he stepped into the hallway. "Horses?" he asked. She shook her head. "No, something closer." By morning, the tracks were gone. The town began to notice her. Women watched with narrowed eyes. Men looked twice. Rumors spread like dry grass fire. Some said Lowen was too composed to knowing. Others said Calder Holt had struck a bargain he did not understand. One afternoon, Lowen found an old ledger in the study. She ran her fingers over the names written inside, dates stretching back decades. "These are your people," she said softly. "They built this place," Calder replied. She paused at one entry, her breath hitching just slightly. "Some histories repeat." Calder noticed the change in her voice. "What do you mean?" She closed the book. "Nothing that can be explained yet." That word again. Later that week, a letter arrived with no return address. Calder found it tucked beneath the door. Inside were only a few words written in firm hand. She was not meant to disappear. Alawan read it and went pale. "Do you know who sent this?" Calder asked. She folded the paper carefully. "I feared this moment would come." "What moment?" She looked at him then, truly looked, the calm she carried cracking just enough to reveal worry beneath. "The moment the past remembered me." Outside, thunder rolled across the prairie, distant but growing closer. Calder felt the land shift under his feet, as if the ground itself sensed change coming. "Who are you running from?" he asked quietly. Alawan did not answer. Instead, she reached for his hand again, that same steady grip, grounding and unsettling all at once. "I did not come here to bring danger," she said. "But danger has a way of finding what it wants." The storm broke as night fell, rain pounding the roof, wind howling through the fields. Calder stood watch at the window, rifle close, heart heavy with questions. Somewhere beyond the darkness, forces he did not yet understand were moving. And in the room behind him, the woman he had married sat in silence, holding secrets strong enough to change both their lives, waiting for the moment when hiding would no longer be possible. The rain left the land soaked and uneasy. Mud clung to boots and the sky stayed low for days after the storm passed, as if the prairie itself was holding its breath. Calder Holt felt it in his bones. Trouble never arrived loudly at first. It settled in quiet places, in small signs a man could ignore if he chose. Calder had learned not to ignore them. Eloan moved through the house with care, keeping herself busy. Yet Calder sensed the strain beneath her calm. She spoke less now. When she did, her words were chosen like tools, used only when needed. The letter stayed hidden in her suitcase, but its weight lingered between them. In town, Gideon Pike did not stop talking. He leaned across the counter at the general store, voice low but carrying. People do not just vanish and reappear with new names and clean hands. Mark my words, that woman brought something with her. Ruth Hale, who ran the store, narrowed her eyes. "You sound eager for trouble, Gideon." "I sound careful," he replied. "This land has a memory." Calder heard pieces of it when he came to town for supplies. He felt the glances, the pause in conversation when he entered. Men tipped their hats with less warmth. Women studied Alawan from a distance when she accompanied him, their expressions unreadable. On the far edge of town, Silas Crow listened quietly. He was a man built like weathered stone, known for seeing patterns others missed. He said nothing, but he watched Alawan closely the one time he crossed paths with her. His gaze lingered on her hands, on the faint scar near her wrist. Something flickered in his eyes before he turned away. At the ranch, Calder found a fence cut clean through, not by cattle or storm, but by deliberate hand. The wire lay coiled like a warning. He repaired it without comment, but that night he checked the perimeter twice. Alawan noticed. "You are expecting someone," she said. "I am prepared," Calder replied. She nodded, accepting the answer for what it was not. That evening, she finally spoke more than a sentence. They sat at the kitchen table, lamplight casting long shadows. "There was a place I came from," Alawan said slowly. "A place that believed it owned people as much as land." Calder listened, still, steady. "They made promises and broke them when it suited them. When I refused to play my part, I became a problem." "Who are they?" Calder asked. She shook her head. "Names give power. I am not ready to give them that here." The wind rattled the windows. Calder felt the urge to push, to demand answers. He did not. Whatever Alawan carried had shaped her into the woman she was now. Pressing too hard might break something neither of them could afford to lose. The next day, Boone Rosk rode up unannounced. Boone was a man known for choosing sides early and rarely choosing the right one. His horse snorted, uneasy, as if sensing the tension clinging to the land. "You got visitors asking questions?" Boone said without greeting. "Men not from around here?" Calder's jaw tightened. "What kind of questions? About your wife?" Alawan stepped onto the porch behind him, her presence firm.
"At."
"And what did you tell them?" Boone hesitated. "That this is Holt land and Holt business." "Good," she said. "Then tell them the same thing if they come again." Boone looked at her with a mix of respect and unease. They will not stop easy. After he left, Calder turned to Alawan. "You are being hunted." She met his gaze. "It was before I ever came here." That night, Calder dreamed of firelight and voices calling a name that was not Elowan Grace. He woke with sweat on his brow, the echo of fear sharp and real. Days later, Silas Crow appeared at the ranch. He dismounted slowly, eyes scanning the land. "I saw riders near the river," Silas said. "They were not fishermen." Calder nodded. "Thank you," Silas hesitated. "Your wife carries herself like someone who has survived worse than gossip." Elowan stepped forward. "Survival leaves marks." Silas studied her, then gave a short nod. "It also leaves enemies." After he left, Calder realized the net was tightening. He felt anger rise, sharp and unwelcome. He had asked for companionship, not danger. Yet when he looked at Elowan, he did not feel regret. He felt resolve. The conflict bled into small moments. A broken gate left open. Supplies shifted in the barn. Once Calder found boot prints near the house that did not belong to him. Elowan noticed everything. "You should not stay alone," she said one evening. "This is my land," Calder replied. "And now it is mine too," she said quietly. The words settled heavy between them. In town, Gideon Pike met with two strangers at the edge of the saloon. Their coats were dark, their questions careful. "We are looking for a woman," one said. "She answers to more than one name." Gideon hesitated, weighing curiosity against consequence. "What did she do?" "She left," the man replied, "and took something that does not belong to her." Gideon's eyes narrowed. "That depends on who you ask." Back at the ranch, Elowan stood at the window as dusk fell, watching the horizon darken. "They are closer," she said. Calder loaded his rifle. "Then they will have to cross me." She turned to him, something fierce breaking through her calm. "You did not choose this." "I chose you," he replied. The words surprised them both. Silence followed, thick with meaning neither was ready to face. Outside, coyotes called, their voices sharp against the night. Elowan reached into her suitcase and pulled out a small, worn object wrapped in cloth. She did not open it, only held it like a burden. "This is why they are coming," she said. "And this is why they cannot be allowed to take me." Calder did not ask what it was. Some truths demanded the right moment. The ranch lights burned late that night. Calder paced. Elowan sat still, eyes distant, listening to sounds only she could hear. Far beyond the fields, riders moved under cover of darkness, guided by greed and unfinished business. And as the land waited, stretched wide beneath the stars, two lives stood at the edge of a reckoning that would test loyalty, courage, and the cost of belonging, with no clear path back to the quiet days that had come before. The days that followed felt stretched thin, like wire pulled too tight. Calder Holt moved through his work with purpose sharpened by worry. Every sound carried weight. Every shadow asked questions. The ranch no longer felt like a refuge, but like a line drawn in the dirt, daring fate to cross it. Elowan Grace changed as the tension grew. Not weaker, sharper. She rose before dawn, helped with the stock, and learned the land as if memorizing it for battle. Yet at night, when the lamps were low and the wind pressed against the windows, Calder saw the strain she worked so hard to hide. She carried fear with discipline, not panic. That frightened him more than tears ever could. One evening, as the sun sank red behind the hills, Silas Crow returned with urgency in his step. "They are gathering," Silas said. 3 riders camped near the river bend. Another pair spotted south of the ridge. Calder nodded, calm on the surface. "Long soon," Silas replied. "They are waiting for something." Elowan stood beside Calder, her hand brushing his sleeve. "There. Waiting for me to run." Calder turned to her. "Will not." Silas studied them both. This land has chosen its side. After Silas rode off, Calder walked the perimeter, checking fences, counting distance, noting cover. The ranch had always been his responsibility. Now it was his shield. He remembered his father's words, spoken long ago by a fire that burned low. A man protects what he claims. What he claims he must be willing to stand for. Inside the house, Elowan opened the cloth-wrapped object again. This time she let Calder see it. It was small, solid, worn smooth by time and handling. It's not valuable for its shine, but for what it represented. Proof, leverage, a truth that powerful men would rather bury than face. "This is why I could not stay," she said. "They called it theirs. They said I was nothing without it. They were wrong." Calder closed his fingers around the object briefly, feeling its weight. This stays here. Yes, she said. But they will come for it. Then they will answer for it. That night, riders circled closer. Calder saw the distant flicker of campfire light beyond the ridge. The horses grew restless. Even the dog stayed alert, ears pricked, bodies tense. In town, Gideon Pike made his choice. He sat alone at the saloon table long after the others left, turning a glass in his hand. He had always believed knowledge was power, that knowing where to stand mattered more than standing for something. But the sight of strangers staking claim to Holt land unsettled him, outsiders bringing old shadows into a place that had already paid its dues. He rose, paid his tab, and stepped into the night. At the ranch, Boone Rosk arrived before dawn, breathless. "They are moving," Boone said, "not hiding now." Calder thanked him and sent him back with a warning to keep his distance. Allowance stood on the porch, the sky pale behind her. "This is the moment," she said. Calder met her gaze. "Whatever happens, you stay close." "I did not come this far to hide," she replied. The first rider appeared at the far fence just after sunrise. Then another. Then more, spreading out like a net tightening. Calder recognized the posture of men who believed the end was already decided. He stepped forward, rifle visible but lowered. "This is private land." A man dismounted slowly, boots sinking into the dirt. His name was known in whispers, Baron Vale. He smiled like someone used to taking what he wanted. "You married a woman who belongs elsewhere," Baron said. "We are here to collect." Eloan stepped beside Calder. "I belong to myself." Baron's eyes hardened. "You always did talk too freely." Calder felt the land hold its breath. From the ridge, Silas Crow watched, rifle ready. From the tree line, Boone Rosk waited. From the road, Gideon Pike approached quietly, decision made too late or just in time. Baron took another step forward. "Hand her over, and this ends clean." Calder did not move. "You are standing on Holt land. There is no clean way to take what is not yours." Eloan's voice carried steady strength. "You are afraid of what I know, not of me." Baron laughed, sharp and humorless. "I am afraid of nothing." "Then you would not have followed me," she said. The tension stretched, thick as storm air. Horses stamped. Men shifted. Calder felt the weight of every choice pressing down on this single moment. He thought of the quiet mornings before all this. Of the empty house that was no longer empty. Of the woman who had walked into his life like fate wearing plain clothes. A shout rang out from the ridge. Another voice answered from the trees. Baron's men hesitated, realizing too late they were not alone. Baron's smile faltered. "See," Eloan said softly, "this land remembers too." The wind rose, carrying dust and the promise of change. Calder tightened his grip, heart pounding, senses sharp. This was the edge of it. The moment before everything tipped one way or another. Baron glanced around, calculating, anger flashing across his face. This is not over. Calder met his stare without flinching. It will be. The men stood frozen, the space between them charged with consequence. Somewhere behind Calder, the house stood firm, no longer just wood and nails, but a place claimed by choice, not fear. As the sun climbed higher, casting long shadows across the land, the final test loomed close enough to touch, and though no blow had yet been struck, every heart present knew that by nightfall, nothing would remain the same. The tension lingered like smoke over the prairie, but the first rays of afternoon light gave Calder Holt a moment to breathe. Baron Vale and his men had hesitated too long under the watchful eyes of Silas Crow and Boone Rosk, and that pause had shifted the balance. Calder felt the weight of the land beneath his boots, steady and unyielding, and it bolstered his resolve. The conflict that had crept into his home, threatening everything he had built, now met a force it had not accounted for. Baron's jaw tightened. He glanced at his men, realizing they were outnumbered and outmaneuvered. The smug confidence that had carried them this far faltered under Calder's calm but unyielding gaze. "This isn't the end," Baron muttered, more to himself than anyone else. He kicked dirt at the ground, then mounted his horse with a reluctant shove. The others followed, leaving behind a silence heavy with both relief and warning. Calder lowered his rifle, feeling the tension drain slowly from his shoulders. Allowance stood beside him, her hand finding his. She did not speak immediately, but her steady presence anchored him. The storm had passed, Yet the air still carried a sharp clarity, like the land itself had exhaled. Calder finally looked at her, really looked, and saw the woman who had walked into his life with quiet confidence and had changed everything. She had not been fragile, nor had she been afraid. She had been deliberate, knowing her own worth, and it had made all the difference. "You were right," Calder said, voice low. "They were waiting for you to run. But you didn't." Alawan smiled faintly. "And you didn't let them take what belonged here, what belonged to me." She touched the small, cloth-wrapped object again, now secure in its place on the table. "This is why I came. This is why I stayed." The rest of the day passed with a quiet sort of relief. Calder and Alawan walked the land together, checking fences and watching the cattle move across the pastures. The sun hung low, painting the prairie in golds and reds. Every hill, every fence line, every stretch of open ground felt like a promise rather than a challenge. Calder realized that the ranch had always been his responsibility. Yes, but now it was their home. Their partnership was no longer just about survival. It was about belonging. When night fell, the house seemed smaller in the way that felt safe. Calder lit the fireplace, and the flames reflected in Alawan's eyes. She unpacked her suitcase finally, placing her few belongings neatly in drawers and closets. Calder noticed how naturally she'd fit into the space, as if she had been there from the beginning. "You're home now," he said simply. "I am," she replied. Her voice was calm, but there was a softness to it that had been missing in the months leading up to this moment. And this is the first time I've truly felt it. For the next few days, life returned to a slower rhythm. The cattle needed tending, fences needed repairs, and the land demanded attention. But the threats that had haunted them were gone for now. Calder and Alawan moved in tandem, their work in sync, their words light and teasing when the day allowed. They laughed over small mistakes, over stubborn horses, over spilled feed. For the first time in years, Calder felt the weight of solitude lifting. Gideon Pike came by town to check in. He tipped his hat to Calder with a smile that was less judgmental than it had been in the past. "Looks like you've done right," he said. "The land's settling, and so are you." Calder nodded. "We're settling. Both of us." Even Silas Crow returned, riding slowly past the property line. He paused and gave a small nod, a gesture of respect that spoke volumes. "This place is strong. And so is she." Alawan had taken to learning the old family ledger of the Holt Ranch. She studied the history of the land, tracing the names and stories that had come before them. Calder watched her one evening as she traced the inked letters with her finger. "You've made this your own," he said softly. "I only wanted to understand it," she replied. "To honor what was here before, and what we can build together." That night, the house felt warm in a way it never had. Calder lay in bed beside Alawan, the past month's tension finally dissolving into quiet comfort. He reached for her hand, and she took it without hesitation, fingers intertwining with his. It was a simple gesture, but it carried years of unspoken understanding and mutual respect. Outside, the prairie stretched under a sky full of stars, endless and steady. Calder thought about the threats they had faced, the men who had sought to disrupt their lives, and he realized that fear had only made him stronger. Alawan had taught him that strength did not come from solitude alone. It came from trust, from partnership, from the courage to stand together even when the odds were against you. In the weeks that followed, the Holt Ranch thrived. Neighbors who had once whispered now visited openly, drawn by the quiet power of Calder and Alawan's partnership. Boone Rosk helped with the repairs, and even those who had been wary of Alawan began to see her not as a stranger, but as a force that belonged to the land. The seasons began their slow shift. Spring brought wildflowers to the pastures, and the cattle moved more freely across green fields. Calder and Alawan spent long days working together, the rhythm of their lives blending seamlessly with the land. The house no longer echoed with emptiness, but with conversation, laughter, and quiet evenings by the fire. One evening, Calder stood at the porch rail, watching the sun dip behind the horizon. Alawan joined him, leaning lightly against his shoulder. "Do you think we're ready for whatever comes next?" she asked. He shook his head slowly, smiling. "I don't know if anyone is ever ready, but I do know we face it together, and that makes all the difference." Alawan smiled back, resting her head lightly against him. "I like that," she said softly. As the stars appeared one by one, Calder felt a deep sense of peace. The dangers had not vanished entirely, but their bond had created a sanctuary stronger than any threat. The land, the house, and their lives were intertwined now, each supporting the other. They had weathered storms, faced enemies, and discovered the resilience that comes from courage, love, and trust. Calder's gaze swept over the prairie, stretching beyond the fences and hills. He could see the potential in every acre, the promise of a life built together, and the security that came from knowing that whatever challenges arose, they would face them side by side. Eloan squeezed his hand. "We have a lot to do," she said with a spark of humor, referring to the ranch work that would never truly end. Calder chuckled. "Yes, but now it will be our work. Ours together." And in that moment, as the night settled softly around them, both Calder and Eloan understood the truth of their journey. They had found one another not by chance, but by choice. The land had tested them, their fears had tested them, and the past had tried to claim them. Yet here they were, standing together, stronger, wiser, and finally at peace. The ranch hummed with life as the fire crackled in the hearth. The cattle moved across the fields, and the wind carried a sense of calm that only comes after a long storm. Calder and Eloan, hand in hand, faced the horizon with hope, knowing that this was the beginning of a future they would build together, one grounded in love, respect, and the unbreakable bond that had carried them through danger, uncertainty, and the trials of the heart. The story of the Holt Ranch had taken a new turn. It was no longer a story of loneliness, of fear, or of unanswered letters. It had become a story of partnership, courage, and the quiet triumph of standing together. Calder and Eloan had not only survived, they had found a home in each other, and in the land that had watched over them for generations. And under the endless sky, with stars glimmering like old promises kept, the prairie held them safe. The ranch stood strong, and two lives once shaped by uncertainty now embraced the certainty of love, respect, and a future full of possibility.